Okay, tonight we're down to James chapter 5 and in verse 7. James now is bringing his teachings to a conclusion in his last chapter, and he has been talking down here so far about the rich. What he has said about them, really, we're not going to go back and review, except to merely say this. And that is, as he's talking about what these rich people do, that they're the ones that cause the Christians a lot of trouble. That many of the Christians were suffering because the rich were taking them to court and taking advantage of them. And so he's trying to tell these people, the Jewish people who are living out in the dispersion, out throughout the Gentile lands, here is how you ought to live. And so he's told them the attitude that they're to have toward these rich, and so not to show favoritism toward them, not to try to appease the rich and show partiality toward them over the poor, because the rich were the ones causing them a lot of trouble. Now then, as really we then talking about these troubles, that then launches us into where we began tonight in verse 7. And so what he says then in verse 7 is, be patient, therefore. So therefore, since this is your lot in life, since you're going to have to suffer due to the rich in many ways, therefore, now I might stop right here and make this observation. Especially at this time, in this generation, in this year, in this month, at this time, I think all of us can look and we can see some applications about how rich can take care of you, and how riches, as you look at them and you want to show partiality, and how really bad these people can be. In our generation, as you look now at the economy that we've got now, and you look around and all of a sudden, here are all these people that need bailouts. And so as you look at them, how many poor people needed a bailout? And as you look and you say, well, wow, okay, who needs them? Well, it's all of the rich. Well, what's happened to all of the rich? All of these guys that are up there. What's happened to the money? What's happened to your money? As you now are paying billions of dollars more, billions have disappeared. Now you're paying billions of dollars more, and who's causing all of this trouble in our country? That's the only point that I want to make. Is it the rich? As you look at the culture among us, would you say, oh, it's this clientele, these are the kind of people that have got our country into the problem that it is in? Is it the powerful and the rich, or is it the poor? Now, whether you like it or not, it's going to affect you, and you're going to suffer from it. You're going to have to pay for it in some way or another. So I just make that illustration because that's the way it's always been in society. The rich always are in a position where they can take advantage of the poor. And so he's telling them, now, these are the people that's like this. And he said, these are the people that can take you to law and so forth and so on, can win the battle, and you're going to suffer. So you say, okay, what do we do? Now, before we take a look and we see here what James says, let me ask you a simple question. What are you going to do about it? What do you plan on doing about all these billions that they're giving to the rich? Okay? And you're just going to do what I do, don't you? You're just going to sit there and shake your head and pay your taxes. There's nothing you can do. Nothing you can do. But there is something that you can do. One of the things that you can do is just get tremendously upset, throw a temper tantrum, pick up your gun, go try to find somebody who is rich and shoot them. That might help a little bit, wouldn't it? I mean, you might feel a little bit better, but you look and you say, what should we do? Well, that's one way that you can go about it. What James is saying, now as we go through this life as Christians, where we don't have all of this power and all of the power that money will buy for us, where we can take advantage of other people as the rich are doing even in our generation, here now is what I want you to do. And it's just the opposite, again, of what you want to do. Have you ever noticed when you get down in practical Christianity, what you should do is always, well, almost always, just the opposite of what you want to do? And so here it is, he said, now, under these circumstances, here's what I want you to do. Be patient, therefore, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. So I want you to be patient under this. Well, as you look at the word patient in here, it's kind of an interesting word, and we've already studied patience back in chapter 1. When is it that, how is it back in chapter 1 that we learned to get patience? Do you remember that? What has to happen to us before we can really learn to be a patient person? It's tribulation. It's going through these tribulations and suffering. That's the only way that we can really learn patience. Now, that back there, he dealt with it. So let's look at it now, because there's two words in the Bible that are translated back and forth. Both of them are translated patience, and one of them is translated long-suffering and so forth. But let's look at it. Now, this word right here, it comes from two Greek words. The first word is that word there, hypo, which means under. So that's your first part. And then the next Greek word is meno, which means to remain. So what this word means is to remain under, to stand firm under. Stand firm under any burden or tribulation of life. While these tribulations are heaped upon us, don't waver, don't give up, don't collapse, don't leave the Lord, don't violate His law. Just stand under. Continue on then. Now this is the word that means bearing up under things that are happening to you. As these things come upon us, go ahead and bear up. Just keep on, keeping on. Don't break down and leave Christ. Now the other word that's translated patience is also translated long-suffering, and it comes from two other words. It comes from a word there that macros, which means long, and thumos, which means temper. So this word means to have a long temper. We don't have that word in English, do we? But we do have the word short temper, don't we? Wonder why that's there. Wonder why we don't have the word long temper, but we have the word short temper. Got any idea? Isn't that you? What's the matter, Linda? Oh, yeah, okay, I think she's got it here. We don't have too many people running around with long tempers, do we? Long tempers don't really start a lot of problems and cause a lot of trouble, and something that we need to talk about. When's the last time that you sat down and you talked about somebody that really we need to do something with? We've got a problem. He's long-tempered. He just keeps on keeping on. No, it's the short-tempered. Now, that's what this word right here is, and this has the idea of dealing with people. Now, where we become short-tempered in dealing with people, the agitation that they bring upon us, this word is don't break down under those conditions. So you got two Greek words then, meaning patient here. Now, the one that's in here is your first word up there. It's the one that just keep on bearing on under all these conditions that come upon you. Now, things to do here if you are patient. Now, he talks here. He said, be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient over it, and it receiveth the early and the latter rain. Now, here under the coming of the Lord, he's going to mention this a couple of times in here. And as he's mentioning this, there's two things that it could refer to. The Lord came a few years after James wrote this letter. He came in 70 A.D. to destroy Jerusalem. And the Bible talks about the coming of the Lord in Matthew chapter 24, how Jesus is coming on a cloud and so forth. And it could mean that. Or it could mean the coming of the Lord, meaning the second coming, of when he's coming again to hold you and me responsible for what we have done. Now, I think it's the latter. I don't conceive of him telling these people here. As you just look at it, you say, okay, here's all these people that are out here throughout the whole world, and he's telling them, now you be patient until Jesus comes and destroys Jerusalem. Doesn't make sense in that. But the Lord is coming, and he's coming, and you're going to give an account of your actions. So you be patient. Now, how long do you have to be patient? In other words, what's the time limit? He set a time limit on here. He said, you don't have to be patient forever. How long do you patient? Until the Lord comes. Until the Lord comes. You just be patient until he comes back. Now, most of us, we may not have to wait that long because we might go meet him before he comes back. But either way you look at it, you're to be patient until he comes again, which means you now make up your mind to be patient for the rest of your life. Don't buckle under. It's kind of like Revelation 2:10. Be thou faithful how long? Unto death. So that's what James is telling us here now. So you now take this on and be patient until the coming of the Lord. He said this is just reasonable when you look at it, because he said, look at the husbandman, look at the farmer. Now farmers, they have an occupation that is based on patience. They go out in the spring and they plant their crops, and then they stand back and they wait on the rain. Now the rain, a certain amount of rain has to come or they'll have crop failure. The rain has to come within a certain reasonable period of time or they have crop failure. They're going to have rain at the beginning of their growth period and rain at the end of their growth period, or they're going to have crop failure here. So he said, now it's just like the husbandman here. That's the way I want you to look at it. As you say, oh boy, how long do I have to wait? Well, how long does a farmer have to be patient? See, what would you tell a farmer? Somebody that's going into farming, this next spring they go out and they spend $100,000 on seed. They plant it in the ground. How long would you tell them they're going to have to be patient? It's until the harvest time. You're going to have to be patient all the way through. What would you think about a farmer that was not patient all the way through? He plants in May, and then the rains haven't come, or too much rain comes. He's done something here. And by June, he's jumping up and down. And by July, he's pulling his hair out. And by August, he's screaming and yelling. And by September, he's committing suicide, I guess. You say, well, no, that's not the way a farmer needs to live. You're going to have to be patient until you harvest the fruit. So that's what he's saying. Be patient until the Lord harvests his fruit. So it's just a colorful way of telling us how we're to be patient. Now, in all of this, then, he goes ahead and he says another thing. Be also patient, establish your heart, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. So now, I want you to establish your heart. I want you to firmly take control of your heart, your mind, establish it, and you can see the definitions there. Make it strong, prop it up, brace it up, make sure that you don't falter in all of this. Have that strong heart that's going to keep you to be patient, because the coming of the Lord is just at hand. Now, when you think about the coming of the Lord, and you say, well, I have to be patient until the coming of the Lord. Now let me ask you, I want you to be honest with me. How long will you have to be patient? When is the Lord coming? When I want you to be patient until the coming of the Lord. How far down the road is that? Now be honest with yourself. How many of you are looking for it next year? Now, could the Lord come tonight during this class? We all know that. See, we all know that. But it's kind of like a young boy. You take a 18-year-old boy and you talk about death. And you say, well, now, son, are you ever going to die? What will he say? Well, sure, yeah, everybody's going to die. But does he believe he will die? At that age, it can't comprehend it. It is so far away that you cannot comprehend it. And so what James is trying to get us to see is that you be faithful unto the coming of the Lord. That's not going to be very long. It won't be very long is what he's trying to get us to see. Because you're either going to die and go meet the Lord, or the Lord's going to come, and it's not going to be very long. Now, let's again be honest with ourselves. How many of us are much better than the 18-year-old I was talking about? How many of us thinks about death and realizes it's just right around the corner? We won't be here too much longer. It seems like it's just one of those things that with human beings, as we grow up and go through life, it's one of those things we talk about, but we just can't comprehend it. It's just way out there, and it doesn't hit us until all of a sudden we see it, and we can't get around it. See? And you look at it. Now you take me. When am I going to die? How much more time have I got? Man, I don't know. I got a lot of time, I'll tell you that. It's as you look at it, and I'm not going to get up tomorrow and get out there and start working real hard and say, man, Helen, I don't have much time. I've got to, do this thing. But now, if you take my age and you do a little adding and subtracting, what would you tell me about, Lowell, how much time do I have? See? As you add and you subtract. And you say, well, wait just a minute. If 80 years by reason of strength, and I'm 77 and a half, you get out your pencil and paper and you say, you may not have much more time, see, that's there. But can we really believe it? Now, I know you can believe it with me. That's the reason I use that example. Nobody has any hard time of believing it with me. You're saying, yeah, I don't see how you made it this far. But do you really believe it with you? Because when you get out your pencil and paper, it's a little bit off, but it's not a whole lot when you get to thinking about it. Most of you, it's what you call over the hill, isn't it? That if you live as much as you've lived now, that's ridiculous. See? So yeah, you're down over the hill. That's in there. Now, do we comprehend that? That's the only point that I'm making here. And this is what James is telling us. He's trying practical Christianity. He's trying to get us to see, devote your life to Christ. And don't ever become despondent. Don't ever give up, because it's not long. It's not long. Just give what few years you've got to the Lord. Establish your heart, because regardless of what you think, it's really not that long. So, do this. And then he tells us some other things now. Now, this other thing is kind of tough. He said, now, while you're doing it, murmur not. While you're living in this world and going through this life, don't murmur. Now, come back and put it in context here. We're talking about, the book of James is talking about practical Christianity, and a lot of it about living under tribulation. These tribulations and these problems that you have in life. Now, as I started class tonight, we talked about all of this nonsense of this bailout money. How do we feel about that? Can anybody in here, I'll give you time right now. This will be our first political statement we've ever made. I'll give you time to stand up and explain it to me and how it makes sense. Right? Of how all of these gigantic companies, what happened to the money and why they need it, and you do that. Nothing makes sense. So what is the tendency to do? See, what's a tendency that we do? What kind of a person can that make out of us? Somebody that's happy and contented? Does that cause you to be happy and contented? Let me put it this way. Anybody in here happy and contented because of this great, gigantic, worldwide mess that we're in? No. What does it tend to cause us to do? Complain. Murmur. Now, murmur is an interesting word. Murmur is not talking about something like I'm talking about tonight, which I'm complaining, right? I mean, I haven't said anything good about all of this. That's not murmuring. That's talking about it in a constructive way and so forth, and we might tease about it and do all of this. But murmuring, here's what murmuring is. If I come in next Sunday, well, what do you think about these idiots that's up there? Isn't that something? Just a bunch of idiots. Yeah, I know, just a bunch of, yeah. Well, I can't say. Next time, say, yeah. Now, all this can be true. All this can be true. But what am I doing? I'm turning into a chronic complainer, is what I'm doing. Now, that's what murmuring is. It's complaining, just complaining and complaining about life. In the Old Testament, this was the great sin of the children of Israel in the wilderness. I've always thought about those people and about this murmuring that they had, and as you look at it, you see that God punished them, God killed them. There are times that he opened up the earth and he killed people, and he caused fires to come among them, and he caused poisonous vipers, and God just literally killed thousands and thousands and thousands of the people in the wilderness, and it was because of their murmuring. That was the big thing. Now, as you look and you start out, you take a look at those people back there. The first 3 days out of Egypt, they had bitter water and they started murmuring. You remember how their murmuring was, what it consisted of? Oh, I wish we'd have stayed back in Egypt. You brought us out here, and now then we don't have this, we don't have that. I just wish you had, it just blah, ha, blah, and complaining. And God gave them water. Then the second month and the 15th day, they ran out of food. So they started complaining. No food. Oh, I wish you'd left us back there. Our kids are hungry, blah. And so they start complaining. So God gave them food. Now, before I go any farther, let me ask you, do you think these two things would be a legitimate reason for murmuring? If you didn't have any water, would that have some legitimacy to it? And if you didn't have any food, yeah, you bet you. Well, about a year after that, then they had this big complaining here in Exodus 11 and so forth, and we'll not go into that, and of complaining about various things. And then they got tired of the manna. They'd been eating that manna for all these many years and months, and they got sick and tired of it. They complained that it just... Is that a legitimate reason to complain? Suppose the only thing you had to eat, you name it right now. I'll give you the opportunity to write down on a piece of paper. You name what you want to eat the rest of your life, and God will give it to you. And that's what you're going to have, 3 meals a day the rest of your life. Do you think you would start complaining somewhere down the line? Even if it was chocolate pie? So, yeah, you would. It just gets so tiresome. One of our biggest things is, what do all of us do a couple of days after Thanksgiving? Helen comes in and says, do you want a turkey sandwich? And guess what I say? No. Let's go get a taco, or let's have had enough turkey. How do you suppose that'd be if you ate it for a year? That's in there. Then Moses got married, and he married the wrong kind of woman, an Ethiopian. They didn't like that. And then they were afraid to go fight the Canaanites. Is that a legitimate reason? How would you like to have to go fight somebody, and then when you went to check them over, you looked and they were all twice your size? You think that would be legitimate to say, oh, we can't do that? No, you bet your life. In other words, all these things, as you look at them, as things, yeah, you would be concerned about. Then again, on water. Now, murmuring, that was the Old Testament complaint. Now, what he says in the New Testament, learn not to murmur. Don't be complainers. Don't be complainers. You're going to suffer, you're going to have tribulation, and you're not going to like it. It is not fun. You have a right not to like it. It's not fair. There's reasons why you can hate it. But in all of these things, learn not to be a complainer. So he said, this is what I want you to do now as a Christian. Murmur not, brethren, one against the other, that you be not judged. So now don't complain here against each other, how you're taken advantage of and so forth, so that you be not judged. Now, if you do start murmuring against your brethren, there's going to be some judgment that's going to take place. Now, we could go back to James's brother taught on this. Who was James's brother that taught on this? Jesus. Yeah. Jesus. He taught on this. And what did he say? Judge not. And he taught then on this, that you be not judged. For what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. And when he prayed, what did he pray for? That I said, pray for this, that you forgive, because you're going to be judged on what basis? The way you forgive your brother, somebody who does harm to you. And so we need to always keep this in mind in our murmuring and our complaining about people, that one day we're going to be judged. Now, it's only for guys like Jim and me. We're the only two guys that can get by with this murmuring. Because we don't ever do anything wrong, do we, Jim? Now, if we do something wrong, what's going to happen to us? We're down here murmuring, and we stand before the judgment bar of God. Now then, we're not judging anymore. Now God's judging us, and how am I going to be judged? The way I judge people down here. And so he gives us these motivating factors and lets us see, wow, yeah, this is something that's real. This is something that is really true. So, he said, don't be judged. Behold, the judge standeth at the door. It's not going to be long until we're going to stand before him. Then he says, take, brethren, for an example of suffering, the prophets. Or the example of suffering, yeah, and of patience, the prophets who spake in the name of the Lord. So now about the time we say, look, I suffer so much. People cause me so much trouble. They just trouble heaped upon me, and they cause me so much trouble, and life, the wicked people and brethren and all, and I'm not bringing it on myself. They are causing it. Well, okay, that's going to happen in this life. But he says, now, stop to take this. you have some examples that have gone on before you, and it's the examples of the prophets. So go back and look at those guys. Go back and look at the prophets and see what they went through. As you look at the prophets, don't you think that that would have been an exciting time in history? Had you been there with them and God literally called you? And you had been there with Amos and God had actually called you and said, I want you to go do this. And it must have been an exciting time. Well, what did those guys have to go through? So you go back and you look at them, and that's about all that they didn't receive glory. They just received all this tribulation. Jesus said one time, therefore, behold, I send unto you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them you kill and crucify, and some of them you scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city. So he's saying, now here's what happened to these men I send to you. He's talking to the Jews. And he's telling the Jews, I have sent to you these men to tell you what's wrong with you. And what have you done with them? You've done all of this. Now, as you look at it, you say, well, those horrible people, those horrible Jews, and you're right. You're right. And that's what God's doing. God is condemning them. But forget the Jews right now. Think of the prophets. How would you feel if God sent you to go talk to these horrible people and try to get them to repent? And God sent you and says, you go tell those sinners, and those sinners just turned on you and heaped all kind of persecution on you. How would you feel? Would you feel like it wasn't fair? Doing that? So he said, take a look at those men, those prophets there. In Acts 7:52, he said, which of the prophets did not your fathers persecute? And they killed them that showed before the coming of the righteous one, of whom ye have now become murderers, betrayers, and murderers. So here Stephen tells them, as you go back and you look at the prophets that God sent, all those prophets, name me one that your forefathers didn't persecute. Well, you say those horrible Jews, and you're right, you're right. But think about the prophets. Whichever prophet it was, where they went out to try to help the Jews, trying to get the Jews to turn from their sins, in every case, the prophets were persecuted. So he says, think about those men. You see, we're not the only ones. We're not the only ones that suffer in life. We're not the only ones that have things to be bitter about. We're not the only ones to have things to complain about. All these people that serve God who's come before us, they're all our examples in doing this. So James says, remember them, look at them. And then we're told in Matthew 5, rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets that were before you. I didn't put the verse in there before that, but when you're spoken against and when you're persecuted, then rejoice and be exceedingly glad. That's just the opposite of what you want to do. Just the opposite of what you want to do. Under cases like this, you want to pay them back. You want to take vengeance and pay them back. So James is trying to tell us, here's how you have to learn how to live. So blessed, then, how they were blessed. He said, now we call them blessed. That word means inner contentment, peace, and happiness. And when we think of them, think how blessed we consider all the people mentioned in Hebrews 11. Blessed. Now, Matthew 5, blessed are ye when all men speak evil of you, and so forth. So, blessed, he said, we call those prophets blessed when they do that. Now they were. Okay, you pick your prophet. Doesn't make any difference who it is. He said, just show me one that's not fitting here. So pick your prophet. And you look at how he was persecuted and how he had to suffer. And we call them blessed. We say that man was blessed. What does that mean? Well, could you say that Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, the man that cried his eyes out, the man that was thrown in the mud dungeon until he sunk up to his waist, and they were leaving him there as his prison, could you say that, boy, I'd like to have some of that kind of treatment? Wasn't he blessed? Wasn't Jeremiah blessed? No. Well, he was. We call Jeremiah blessed. That's what he's saying. We call him blessed. What do you mean? Because that guy down there in that pit, poor old Jeremiah, who had preached his eyes out, cried his eyes out, preached his lips off, and now he's down in that pit and he's suffering. And he's looking up at these evil men who have thrown him in to tell him to shut your mouth. They're looking down on a man that has inner peace. He has inner commitment. Outwardly, he's suffering. He's in the old cold water and mud. He's hurting. Outwardly, he's suffering. But blessed are you. That's what Jesus is saying, and that's what James is saying. That's when you have inner peace. So you try to picture him looking up at those faces looking down. Those faces looking down are rich, powerful, people living in pleasure, ungodliness, doing what they want, throwing him down there. But what's on the inside of them? Turn it around. And you see down here a poor man that's just waiting in mud and can't even lay down. And you see his out condition, but what's on the inside of him? It's a powerful lesson. That's the reason James is telling us these things. It's just a powerful lesson. So be patient is what he's telling us to do. Now, of course, he's going to come up with the greatest example that in all the Bible. And then he comes to this. And he said in here, and we call them blessed, and ye have heard the patience of the Lord, how that the Lord is full of pity and mercy. I skipped Job. And ye have heard the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, how that the Lord is full of pity and merciful. So you take Job now. Here is a man all of us know about. We all know his story. There's a whole book in the Bible about it. And you think about that man. And what's the one word you think about when you think of Job? It's patience. It's patience beyond and above anything that you can possibly think of. How would you feel if all of a sudden you're the richest guy in the whole country, everybody's looking up at you, you have servants all over every place, and all of a sudden you get your message that your children have all just been killed? And you get the message then on the same day that all of your herds and flocks have been destroyed. That's like your 401k, your business, whatever it is you're in. Everything. You've lost all of your wealth. Same day. And your servants and your houses have been killed. You're there. He falls on his hands and knees and he prays to God, and he prays to God, you have given and you've taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And you say, that poor man, and I can't even imagine it. But then the next thing, he suffers so much that he loses his health. And he loses his health so that he has all these scabs all over him. And as he scratches and the scab comes off, then more diseases come and more scabs grow. And he goes out and takes those pottery, and he breaks it. And he takes a slab of that, broken pottery, and scratching, trying to find some comfort. And of course, all it brings is pain. And he can't get any sleep. And his dreams are keeping him awake. And he's in total torment. And his wife comes in, and she turns against him and says, "You need to curse Jehovah so he'll kill you." What else do you have to lose? Lost his wife. He had such a great reputation that those 3 guys came all those many miles, and they came to give him some comfort. Be like somebody flying from the other end of the world today to come here to give you comfort that you were in such pain. And when they walked in, they looked at Job, and they saw a man who was hurting and so miserable that they looked at him and they couldn't speak. They sat down and looked at him for 7 days. Never said a word. Just looked at him for 7 days. All of us have seen people suffer and we don't know what to say. Haven't you been there? I've been in a case like that. I just didn't know what to say. Have you ever gone to the hospital and you didn't know what to say, and so you sat down on the couch and you sat there for an hour or two? Anybody ever sat there for 7 days? I'm not saying a word. And the reason that they couldn't say anything, they were so overwhelmed with the pain that man was suffering. And they had a philosophy, and their philosophy was that all sickness and pain is caused by sin. And if that is true, Job is the greatest sinner that ever walked. So then they got up the courage, and then they took off on Job, and they began to condemn him. And the book then tells about the conversation that went back and forth. Job lost everything. He lost everything. And all this time, Job doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know what you and I know. He doesn't know that the devil has talked to God and said, if you'll turn him over to me, I'll make him renounce you. And God says he's in your hands. You do whatever you want to do except one thing. You can't kill him. Now, what's the only thing that Job was praying for? What was it he wanted? To die. And it's impossible to die. And so there the poor man is. And he doesn't know this. And he endures it. And he endures it. And he holds up under it. And he holds up under it. Until finally you come down to the end. And then the end of the book, it's as James says, then you see that the Lord who permitted him to suffer so greatly, is full of mercy and full of pity. As you look at it here, the end of the Lord is his design or his plan that he had for him. God does have pity on us, has emotions for us. He is merciful. The word merciful there literally comes from bowels, and it's what they use for emotions. When something happens and you see something and you just, like this, where do you get the feeling? Now we know that up here's where our spirit is, but where does your feelings, where does it hit you? See, it hits you there. You get butterflies in your stomach, and you do that. It affects God. It's what it's saying in that way. God had these tender mercies. And then look what God did to Job after it's all over. And Jehovah turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. And Jehovah gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then came therefore unto him his brethren, all of his sisters, and all they that had been of his acquaintance before, and did eat bread with him in his house, and they bemoaned him and comforted him concerning all the evil that Job had brought upon him. So Jehovah blessed the latter end of Job more than his beginnings, and he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she-asses. He doubled his wealth. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And in all the land there were no women found so fair as the daughters of Job. And their father gave them inheritance among their brethren. And after this Job lived 140 years. And so Job died, being old and full of days. So God blessed him. So James is saying, take him and see what he suffered. And don't you ever think that God doesn't care. Don't you ever think God doesn't care. And the end result will be the mercy of God. It may take your life, but the end result will be the mercy of God. So his whole point is, don't waver. Don't waver. Establish your heart. Don't complain. Set your heart on God. And don't waver one iota. Wow. When you look at Job and you think practical Christianity, that's impressive to me. Okay, class dismissed tonight.